My name's Edward Davey. I'm the International Engagement Director of the Food and Land Use Coalition. We are a coalition of 9 international organizations and 7 country platforms working together to pursue decisive reform of the world's food and land use system in this critical decade for humanity and for the planet. And it's my great honor and privilege on the eve or a week prior to the pre-summit of the UN Food System Summit to bring together 5 of our wonderful leaders in the coalition, all distinguished leaders in their field and of their own organizations, who've kindly taken the time to give us really an insight into the UN Food System Summit. What's at play? What's at stake? What do they want to see out of this important meeting next week in Rome and at the actual summit in September in New York? On hunger, on farming, on the role of business, on the leadership and the work of important countries in the world, such as China and Colombia. We have a distinguished panel, and I will introduce them momentarily in turn. But I wanted really just to take 2 more minutes to set the context for those who are not so immersed in the UN Food System Summit. What is it? Well, over a year ago, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, convened for the first time in the history of the UN, its 75-year history, a food system summit. There have been summits at the UN before on food, but this is really historic because it's the first time that the UN system has brought together actors working across the food system, from hunger and nutrition, to diets, to more sustainable agricultural practices, to livelihoods, equity, rights, and to adaptation and resilience. Indigenous peoples, farmers, food processors, traders, academics, scientists, business leaders. It's been an extraordinary process, all set within the context, of course, of this pandemic, which continues to affect the lives of so many around the world, and which itself is related intimately to the food system. Around the world over the past year, many countries, over 140, have engaged with the UN Food System Summit by conducting national dialogues, Food System Summit dialogues, which are meant to bring together in countries many of the key players in the food system, and which have been bringing forward recommendations to the summit. The Secretary General has invited the heads of state of all of the countries of the world to the actual summit in September. And next week in Rome, many governments are also expected to attend, some in person in Rome and others, because of the pandemic, virtually. There will also be representation from businesses, from indigenous peoples, from farmers, and from civil society and academia. We're going to take 5 minutes from each of our speakers with a quick question from me after they've spoken. We're then going to open it up to the floor. So please do send questions in, and our colleagues on the line will be collecting your questions, and I'll put them to our panel after we've done a round. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to invite Lawrence Haddad, who's Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, to give us a sense, Lawrence, about how you see this summit. You've been really at the heart of it this past year. What have you been driving? What do you want to see come out at the summit next week and in New York in September?
Thanks, Ed. That was a really nice intro. Really, congratulations, and thank you for inviting me and everybody else and putting together such an interesting hour and a half. Ed, I was talking to one of the national conveners from Africa last week, and these are the conveners that put the dialogues together that David Navarro and 4SD are shepherding that process. I think there are 140 countries that are involved in the process, and I was talking to one of the African ones, and he was saying hunger is an ugly word. I didn't really know where he was going with that statement. I thought maybe he was going to say to me, you shouldn't be talking about hunger. It's depressing. It's not what we think of when we think of food system transformation. But actually what he meant, and he clarified, was it is an ugly word, and therefore we have to talk about it and we have to confront it. So I want to talk about 4 firsts in my 4 minutes that are remaining. So the first first is it's the first time in 35 years, I've been doing this for 35 years. It's the first time in 35 years I've seen hunger numbers jump this much in 1 year. You know this. You will, and the audience will know the SOFIA report, the State of Food Insecurity in the World report, came out last week. The hunger numbers are about 650 million in 2020. I was thinking they would go up by about 60, 70, 80 million, which is horrific enough, but they went up by 118 million. That's an 18% increase. Some of the regional numbers are truly almost unbelievable. West Africa up by 50%, the numbers. Latin America and the Caribbean up 35%. Southern Africa up 33%. South Asia up 20%. These are big, big numbers. So that's the first thing. That's the jolt of energy that's made us sit up and take notice. We knew the numbers were going to be bad, but I didn't know they were going to be this bad. The second first is, for the first time, we have a roadmap that tells us how to get from where we are right now to 200 million people by 2030. And that's not the end of hunger, but it's 2% of the population in 2030. It's not bad. The roadmap is, in fact, was published today in the journal Nature, just came out. It was published, the report was published in October of last year, but the articles in the journals have just made it out right now. And they outline 10 areas in 50 countries where essentially investment has to double, most of it public investment, but we're hoping some private sector investment will come in as well. And it's investment in a very systems way. It's investing in excluded groups, some of the groups you mentioned earlier, Ed, indigenous people, women, youth, small farmer organizations. It's investing on the farm, getting technology, finance, improved seed, improved soil quality, irrigation to smallholder farmers, and it's investing in food on the move throughout the food system in terms of cold chains, infrastructure. It's investing in those areas in a way that reduces hunger by generating livelihoods for 500 million smallholders, and doing it in a way that meets the Paris targets for agriculture. The third first is this summit, Ed, that you mentioned. It's the first time all these different groups have come together. And that's what makes it so exciting. It's driven not only by member states, it's driven by a whole range of stakeholders. It's bringing, we got 2,000 ideas across the action tracks from around the world, which have been boiled down into sort of 12, 13, 14 coalitions of action. One of the coalitions of action is the Zero Hunger Coalition of Action. And the third first is hunger reduction needs to be the first job of any food system transformation. Regenerative agriculture is great for the environment, and it's absolutely necessary. Reducing food loss and waste is absolutely necessary for hunger reduction. Improving resilience is absolutely necessary for hunger reduction, but together they are not sufficient for hunger reduction. We need a dedicated, specific, focused effort that complements all of those other efforts. That's what the summit is all about. So that's the third first. Hunger reduction has to be the first job of this summit. And the final first really is, for the first time, we really have the chance to be the generation that can talk about ending hunger. It sounds kind of corny, but for people like me, it inspires us every day and every week to just go out there and get governments, get businesses, get civil society organizations to focus on this issue. And we're launching this coalition at the pre-summit next week, or previewing it at the pre-summit next week. And we've got, to my pleasant surprise, we've got 8 ministers who are making speeches at that Monday morning session. 2 CEOs, Mary Robinson chairing one of the sessions to bring in the climate angle, David Beasley taking us out, US Administrator Power giving a video message. So the momentum's building, but we have to keep our eyes focused on that issue, because that is the acid test of food system transformation. Back to you, Ed.
Thank you so much, Lawrence, and thank you for this inspiring work that you've done. It's been amazing to watch. What's the single most impactful intervention that you hope to see out of the summit on hunger? Is it political will from nation states? Is it philanthropic donation, companies stepping up? What are you ultimately driving at?
I think ultimately what I want to see, you know, when you think about the extra money that needs to, having these high impact investment areas laid out for us is a tremendous benefit. We're so lucky to have this series report. You know, it's not just one organization and a couple of researchers. This is 100 researchers, I think 50 organizations from 50 different countries. As IFPRI, FAO, ISD, ZEF, you know, all the big guns come together, and they said, this is what the evidence says are high impact investments, and let's put them into the best models we have to say, if we scale these up, how much would it cost and what would the impact be? So that's incredible. So what I really want to see is everyone align behind those 10, you know, because those 10, and obviously there will be different priorities in different countries, and how you do those 10, Ethiopia might say, our priorities are those 3 out of the 10. And to do those 3 in Ethiopia, you need to do it in this way, X, Y, Z. And of course, that's completely right. But I want greater alignment. You know, there's too little, even, you know, we've got, FAO has the Food Coalition, which is great. But why isn't it a Rome-based agency coalition? Why aren't there more RBA, Rome-based agency? Why isn't FAO, IFAD, and WFP doing more together? Why aren't the companies, the big companies, aligning their work around these 10 areas? They do a lot in these 10 areas already. Align, tell us what you're doing in these 10 areas, and then maybe you'll find ways that are neutral in terms of commerce, or maybe even enhance your commerce to do a bit more in these 10 areas in these 50 countries. So what I'm hoping for is big increases in investment, but not by finding new money necessarily, but by aligning resources better, aligning within countries, across countries, and across stakeholders.
Thanks so much, Lawrence. We'll come back to you in the Q&A. Our next speaker is Arianna Giuliodori. Arianna runs the World Farmers Organization, I think upwards of 70 farmers associations around the world. Arianna, it's wonderful to have you with us. We'd love to hear from your perspectives on what the farmers are bringing to the summit, how you feel your voices have been heard, what you'd like to see. Over to you, Arianna.
Thank you very much, Head. It's a great pleasure to be here with you this afternoon, or this morning, this evening, depending on where you are. You have already clearly explained how historic this summit is in terms of combining priorities that have always been approached in silos so far. So food security and climate, nutrition and biodiversity. You know, as farmers, we feel so comfortable with this approach because this is exactly how farmers are always working and planning on their farms. Every day we work to feed the world, to feed our families, our communities, but we also have to take into account the challenges of a changing climate. Nobody better than the German farmers these days know what a disaster a changing climate can be when the flood is invading your farm, or our Canadian farmers that see, and North American farmers that are attacked by drought. So for sure, climate in combination with feeding, food security is for us the only way, as well as promoting biodiversity and producing healthy, nutritious food for all the consumers. So for us, that's exactly what was needed. Finally, combining those challenges that are on our shoulders every day, having finally the chance to work together with other stakeholders to face these challenges in a holistic way. And even more than this, there is a role of the farmers that needs to be finally recognized, and this summit is providing with an opportunity for that. The farmers not only are business actors providing food, but they are also anchoring food systems. They are families, they belong to their communities. They are the first source of income for millions of families, above all in the developing world. And they also keep track of indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, while at the same time innovating. So, as you can see, many of the keywords, the action tracks, the levers of change. So this architecture of the summit is very complex, but in all of these, the farmers are at the very heart. But being at the very heart of food systems, being under the spotlight when everybody talks about how we should change, how we should produce differently, how we should do this or that, is not enough. It's important that we talk about farmers as actors in a system, and that we all embrace the potential of the summit in terms of the famous SDG 17 that was already there, but now has a totally different meaning. Lawrence has just said, we have an incredible set of stakeholders all at once together and pursuing the same goals. And the farmers feel that this is also a unique opportunity to tackle the imbalances, to say it loud and clear that there is an excessive concentration of power in the value chains. And this summit can give us the opportunity to tackle this. And if we are able to provide farmers with a fair recognition for their effort, they will be ready to do more and more and more, and to be more and more sustainable. So this summit to me is about, and to WFO is about, finding win-win-win solutions. Win for the farmers that we do represent, win for all the people living on the planet. And the third win for sure is the planetary boundaries, our Earth, that needs to be respected. So the real challenge is to move from the proposals into the action. So what we are expecting from the farmer's perspective is to see that this is really a people summit and a solution summit. And moving from the proposals into action means for us that we should build coalitions that are mandatory, including all the stakeholders. There cannot be any coalition without those who are producing food. And this is something that all the stakeholders, starting with the farmers, should be particularly careful about. And finally, let me look into the future. You know, the farmers typically have a longer term in their thoughts. And 2030 is right behind the corner. It's right now. It's 9 harvests, like many people say. So we, the farmers, would also like to see a longer horizon. It's not only about being successful in this Agenda 2030, we do want to see that we are leaving to our children, our grandchildren, and the grandchildren of our grandchildren, a portion of land, the one that we care about, in a better way. The farmers are committing to this. Now the challenge, the effort, and my best wish for the summit is to see that we all collaborate in this direction. Over to you, Ed.
Thank you so much, Arianna. Quick question. Do you feel the farmers' voices have really been heard as we've prepared for the summit? And also, is there anything specific in particular that you want to see happen next week?
I think that this has been a very long process in preparation of this summit, and there has never been such an inclusive and complex process. And for sure, the farmers have been there. And we are particularly proud of the fact that there is a producers engagement group officially meeting and supported by the Secretariat. And this sees many other fellow regional farmers organizations, not only the World Farmers Organization, joining hands trying to promote the farmers' voice, needs, expectations in the run-up to the summit. So definitely yes, my answer is a yes. And what I would love to see next week is really this alignment of actors that first and foremost recognize the farmers as economic actors that are also delivering ecosystemic services and also taking care of their communities. So the complexity of the farmers that is still unknown to many, and we can plan for future coalition and implementation together. But to close on your answer, I think that my wish is to see countries, governments leading the way on national choices that can be as diverse and as unique as possible, but all valuing the diversity that we have as farmers. We can be so diverse, big or small. We can go for organic or for conventional. We can have such a unique set of features. But even if we are diverse, we are all committed to the same goals of creating a sustainable future. That's what I'd love to see. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ariana. And we'll come back to you. There's already been an interesting question for you in the chat about concentration of power and how to address it. We'll come back to you. Our next speaker is Diane Holdorf, one of the leaders of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And again, Diane, you've been really at the heart of this summit. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What should we be expecting from the business community that you represent next week? What are some of the best things that you're engaging in? And how have businesses been involved in the summit? Over to you.
Ed, thank you so much. I think that the panel that you've put together here is a great example of the inclusive approach that the UN has taken with this Food Systems Summit. It's in many ways a quite different approach, creating a people's summit where really every stakeholder who has a role in this urgent systems transformation can come together to have the sometimes really challenging and open dialogues that we know can be needed on some of the toughest issues, because the food system is complex and every different group has a critical role to play, but we only get there with the urgency and the sustainable solutions if we come together. And that's what we are hearing from all of the businesses who are so eager to find solutions together with others. We've had the opportunity with our CEO, Peter Bakker, being appointed by the Secretary General to the advisory group of the Food Systems Summit to help play a role in mobilizing the private sector's ambition and engagement into these shared coalitions of action and solution that have been developing. And really, we hear very consistently, Ed, that this summit is a catalyst to accelerate these global transformations towards an equitable, net zero, nature positive food system that really can nourish all people. That requires all these different parts of the value chain to come together across the private sector, in addition to working with all the different stakeholders. You know, Ariana, you are such a passionate representative of the farmers, and I love knowing that the producer voice is so strong as well in this summit. That comes up through many of the businesses who we've seen be very engaged in this as well. I mean, this transition is really urgent for the private sector also. There's a lot of pressure on hunger in the system, climate change implications, water scarcity, nature loss. These things, while really having a big cause from the food system, also are at the sharp end of the stick when it comes to the urgent challenges that need to be addressed. So recognizing that solutions need to be local, that they need to be people-centered, but that they are celebrated together with other stakeholders, that respect the rights and dignities of all people, that strengthen the resilience, is really the message that business is coming forward with. We've been able to pull together across what we've has as a private sector guiding group, which is a group of over 27 different platforms of engaged businesses, to create a business declaration that sets out that level of ambition. And it calls for some of the movements that we know that we're hearing even from the Secretary General when he set out the need to bring this cross-sector summit together. We need to scale science-based solutions while still recognizing the role of an indigenous knowledge in creating successful outcomes for farmers and regenerative systems. We need to, as private sector, provide investments into research and into innovation that support this resilient transformation across the value chain, that really looks at how, from consumption through to production, all the role of technology and innovation in providing inclusive solutions, market access solutions. We need to contribute along those lines to improve livelihoods and well-beings for all players across the system, farmers, large and small, workers at all phases of the value chain as well, so that we can get to human rights, decent work, and income opportunities that are in line with the SDGs. We're going to see some coalitions together on the topic of a global living income across the food value chain that companies are really engaged with. we're seeing the coalitions around nutrition, like Lawrence was speaking to, coming together with business support. So these all demonstrate the role of business, but equally, business has to incentivize consumers as agents of change. We have a big role to play in helping to create the demand and shift that demand for sustainably produced high quality foods. And then the role of transparency can't be overlooked. We have to scale and accelerate the way that environmental and social risks and impacts are integrated, are reported, that those externalities are valued by the finance market and looked at for the ways that businesses are performing. And that's a big call to action that we have as well. And then finally, figuring out how we have a transformation that does include all. So these are what you'll see and hear from the private sector, the business engagement and ambition in surrounding and engaging in these multi-stakeholder coalitions of action, and how we can do this work together are the big themes that we know will resonate all the way through past September.
Diane, thank you so much. A question for you. There are some in the broader community who question big business. They say big business is part of the problem. They also question how much influence you've had, or big businesses have had in the process. Could you comment, how would you respond to that critique?
You know, I think every sector has challenges, business included, and not every business actor is a good actor. And we have great leaders who are really working at the forefront of the system. And part of our challenge is to bring all other parts of the value chain and businesses along with that. So I think what I would say is, you know, see the courage and the ambition of those leaders who are creating change with and through their own business. We have, you know, heard even from Dr. Kalabat at the beginning, we appreciate the fact that this is a summit where the doors are open to everyone. And we've got to be prepared for these inclusive debates and bringing up and being prepared to address the challenging topics. So we are really trying to engage that spirit where we can contribute to the successful outcomes that we all need. That said, you know, the question of over-engagement, we have been operating in support of the Secretariat's outcomes, not at the center of what the Secretariat is striving to achieve. So we view ourselves as very much playing a big support role in helping to make sure we get to the successful and urgent transitions.
Thank you so much, Diane. We're now going to pivot to two country perspectives. Dr. Shengen Fan, Professor Fan, thank you so much for joining. You have a globally distinguished career, formerly head of the International Food Policy Research Institute, and now in a very important role back in your native China, working for the China Agricultural University. Love to hear your perspectives on how China is approaching the UN Food System Summit and what you think might be a good set of outcomes for China from its engagement in this process.
Thank you, Ed. But China has already achieved almost zero hunger. I think the hunger rate is less than 2%. And Owen said if we can achieve 2%, we can declare our victory. Well, that's exactly what Noreen said. The investment, the policy changes, obviously, you know, the leadership. But that does not mean the Chinese food system should remain the same. Yes, I think China actually shares similar challenges as many other food systems. In addition to some hunger, particularly hidden hunger, overweight, obesity are really rising very fast. Now, obviously, climate change. You have not mentioned about the big flood in Henan province right now, at this moment. Historical. We have never seen that rain in 100 years. Just in one day, it rained the whole year's rainfall. So a massive fields were flooded. So climate change, frequent floods, droughts are serious. Probably will be more frequent, more serious, more extreme. And then obviously, the natural resource degradation, water, land, and so on. But fortunately, China has set up some very good targets. On the climate side, it's carbon neutrality by 2060. On the health side, China wanted to achieve it's called several targets around 2030 called Health China ambitions. So now the question is, how can we use a food system or transform the food system to achieve all these multiple goals? hidden hunger, overweight, obesity, natural resource degradation, climate change, and so on. So together with our colleagues, we have done some study. We have pointed out 4 or 5 strategic directions. The number one actually is governance. Because now the agriculture is dealing with agriculture production, environment is on environment, health is on medical science, or medical services. So they are in silos, they don't work together. But the food system requires every government agencies to work together. You know, health, environment, agriculture, finance, trade. There we needed to have a central government coordination mechanism to bring all the different departments, ministries together, just like what China did before, to bring the relevant ministries together to tackle agriculture and rural development. So it's time to do that for the whole food system. So the governance is number one. So number two is to repurpose subsidies. You know, globally now we are spending $720 billion on subsidizing agriculture, fertilizers, water, output price, and so on. China spends more than 200 billion on that. So how can we keep that money in the agriculture sector and use them to promote the production of healthy, nutritious, and sustainable foods? So money is there. The question is how we're going to reuse it, repurpose it to achieve multiple goals we wanted to achieve under the Food System Summit. So number three is technology. I think in the past, technology was very much designed to achieve high yield, efficiency. But today, the technologies are also required to deliver better nutrition, better resilience, the better climate adaptation. So we need multiple wins technologies. So that requires to change the research priorities beyond the yield, the whole value chain, the multiple goals. And number four is actually our diets. What we eat matters to our health. Clearly, we know that, but it also matters to our environment. Again, so we have done some study to look at the implication of following the Chinese national dietary guidelines. If every citizen in China follow that guideline, obviously millions of deaths will be avoided. But equally important is the carbon footprints will also be reduced by more than 20%. And China could do better if China can follow this Eat Lancet diet, which I was part of the team to develop. Then obviously the gain on health side will be even more. And the gain on carbon emission reduction will be even greater. So changing our diets and change our behavior. So if we wanted to change the whole world, let's change ourselves first. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you, Shengen, for those inspiring remarks and for such an insight in China. I wondered if you could comment on the process of the summit in China. There have been a number of dialogues, I understand. Could you just describe briefly what impact the summit dialogue process has had within China?
Yeah, so this time the multiple stakeholders in China have been engaged. As a researcher, we have organized several dialogues, starting from last December. And then again, I think March or April, I think Lawrence actually attended one of them. So we organized just the 3 dialogues just among the researchers. And then the civil societies, the Good Food Foundation organized their own dialogues, probably 3 or 4 of them. The government organized a national dialogue, again, sometimes in March. And that dialogue brought the smallholder farmers, scientists, government officials, even local communities to engage in that process. Now, obviously, more needs to be done. I think we'll continue to push for that. I think sometimes it's not just government. It is everybody, civil society, the scientists, the private sector, and every citizen.
Thank you so much, Shengen. Our last speaker is Claudia Martinez. Claudia was Environment Minister in Colombia on the board of the Green Climate Fund, and she leads the food. Fantastic to hear from you about what FOLU Colombia is driving in the country as you approach.
Thank you, Ed. I hope you hear me. I have some problems with the connection. Okay, good. Glad to be here. I think what is important to start thinking in Colombia, and as Schengen was saying, is that first we have sort of to align an integral approach to transform food systems, having ministries of agriculture, environment, health, industries, economics, working together in an integral food system agenda. And I think that's crucial. I think we still work in silos throughout the world, as Schengen was saying, and we need to move on that line. So we need to align policies, incentives, disincentives, and to have a unified vision of change where the priorities coincide in restoring the planet while obviously ensuring sustainable production to feed the growing population of the world. Now, in Colombia, food systems are responsible for 50% of the emissions in the country. And during COVID, food systems were much disrupted. Hunger raised. Lawrence put the figures in the table. I think in Colombia, it was even worse. And in a country like Colombia, with all the means to produce food, hunger should not happen. Really, we have all the ecosystems. We're the second most biodiverse country in the world. We have the means to produce food and to feed our people. So we developed a roadmap for the country in a very participatory process and agreed that the main priorities was to work in an integral manner in the territories where things happen. We have different territories as all the rest of the world, and territories are different, and cultures are different, ecosystems are different, and we need to tackle the differences at the territorial level. And we thought that there is room to act from the territories. So we actually started producing these roadmaps at the territorial level. We started with a small department called Quindío, which was sort of a coffee region in Colombia, cultural heritage patrimony of coffee that sort of transformed the land use from coffee to all sorts of uses, eroding the land and sort of doing deforestation. And we knew that, through making a coalition work in this small territory, we could transform food systems, and that is what is happening. We then jumped to another department, which is called Antioquia. Antioquia is the size of Costa Rica or bigger, has more than 6 million people, just to put the context, and is the biggest agricultural producer in the country. But however, it faces food insecurity and is also facing deforestation. So fortunately, in Antioquia, we have a lot of the government willing to act, but a lot of relevant stakeholders from the Bank of Colombia, all the private sector companies, the producers, the consumers, we have the universities, we have the regional environmental corporations willing to act. And so it was easy to forge a coalition to act. And that's what we did. We developed a diagnosis of what is happening in terms of food systems. And we then jumped into developing a roadmap in a very sort of participatory manner with a methodology that made people think in an integral manner and to act accordingly. And so we decided to work in 4 pillars. First, productive and sustainable territories in that department and aquatic systems as well. To promote conscious markets and enterprises aligned with the food systems principles. To ensure a plate of healthy food in every table, reducing obviously food loss and waste, and to prioritize science, innovation, education to transform food systems. We think that is crucial, Ed. And I think that needs to be put in the Food Systems Summit, because unless we have educational systems that sort of think about food systems, we cannot transform the way the world is going. We also decided to have 4 cross-cutting pillars, including governance, which is much important, and how to create a governance around food systems, communication and behavioral changes, how to really understand what changes the behavior of people and communicate that accurately. Innovative financing, obviously, to bridge sort of blended finance to transform food systems, and obviously to monitor the changes, because unless we monitor the changes, we don't know how to sort of transform food systems. So obviously, in line with the roadmap, we're prioritizing actions. As Ariana was saying, is no longer the time just to write, but to act. And so we're, for example, including a selection of lighthouses of restoration, real places where we are all forging sort of changes in one territory to make restoration happen. We're supporting, for example, the transition towards sustainable cattle ranching. Cattle ranching is really one of the main issues in that territory, so we need to tackle that. We're working with the universities to have more educational programs in food systems, well, and many other actions. So obviously, this is the time to act, and this is the time to have everybody working in the territories in coalition modes. We also know that we need heroes of the territories. So we're forging sort of a unified group of actors, producers, Ariana, who are really doing the changes. And we're creating a group of heroes of the territory that we sort of work daily, like weekly, to sort of understand the models, to scale the models, to work together to sort of enlarge this vision of change. So this is what we're doing it, and I think it's exciting, and it's exciting to be making this happening when the Food Systems Summit is happening.
Thank you so much, Claudia. In our last 15 minutes, we're going to ask everybody a question. And Lawrence, I'm going to start with you. Someone has asked, are you confident that there are enough people in the summit who view hunger as the key priority or among the key priorities?
I've been surprised, Ed, how few have. I know that Dr. Kalibata, the special envoy to the Food Summit, she cares about this topic deeply. And obviously the Rome-based agencies care about this topic deeply. But I think there's a feeling that a lot of people felt like we've kind of done hunger. It was a 20th century thing. The numbers were declining steadily year on year. It's kind of boring. Of course, it's not boring for people who are hungry. But that was so 20th century, and let's get on to really sexy topics that are, much more about good news stories. I think that's changed in the last 6 months. I think that, the steady drumbeat of bad news has helped. I think key champions throughout the food system have helped. But I've been surprised actually how difficult it's been.
Thank you, Lawrence. Ariana, you've responded to a question about this concentration of power in supply chains in the chat, but I wondered if you could draw a few of those points out. How do you address this issue?
Thanks, Ed. That's a real key issue for the farmers. Farmers are probably the biggest group in the food system, but also in terms of economic actor. On the other hand, let's not forget the consumers. They are also the biggest and fragmented group. But being fragmented, unfortunately, often means also being weak and being not a price taker, but not a price maker, but a price taker. So from the perspective of the farmers, tackling this imbalance is a fundamental step and needs to be done through different channels. For sure, we need the governments to step up and to commit, for instance, fighting unfair practices in the value chain. For sure, we need to work together with other actors. Oh, there's no silver bullet in this. We might find common ground with all the actors in the food system so that finally farmers can see a fair return for their effort. You know that so often farmers don't even see the production costs covered for their product. And that's what is unacceptable. That is what is unethical today in the value chain. But I am confident that we have raised the bar of awareness and of the ambition. And that's why I'm optimistic about the possibility to get there. But to get there, and I can challenge the others, but the first category that I want to challenge is ourselves. We need strong farmers' voices. We need farmers' organizations. If farmers are fragmented, they cannot be heard as individuals. We need to organize agriculture so that organized agriculture can advocate for the farmers' needs. And then I couldn't agree more with what Claudia has just said about innovation, creating capacities, opening up new horizons, so that what we are talking about here, about unfair, about power imbalances, will be forgotten, because innovation should also refer to the way, for instance, we build contracts, innovation in business models. That's what I am expecting, and that's one of the many ways we can tackle the issue of power in the value chain. Over.
Thank you so much, Arianna. Shengen, there's a question for you on net zero in China and emissions. And China has these ambitious net zero targets for 2060. Could you comment a little bit more about what government of China could do to reduce emissions in the food and agriculture sector? You're on mute, Shengen.
Yeah, right now the effort is more on energy transportation, but we really try to convince the government. Agricultural food system is also very critical. The emissions from agriculture account for probably 10% of the total emissions in China. Well, 10% is a big number because total emissions in China is quite large because industry, exports, and so on. So we have done some analysis how China could achieve its net zero from food system, maybe even negative. One is obviously the innovations. I think Claudia, Adriana, many have mentioned about innovations. But the innovations is not simply just to increase the yield. Innovations also involves cutting down the use of fertilizers, pesticides. So you produce more yields, but in the meantime, use less fertilizers. And there are some practices, there are some technologies already, and we need to move them to scale. So that's the innovation part. Then reducing food waste and loss. I think Claudia also mentioned about that. Reducing food waste loss in China could also reduce the carbon emissions quite a bit. Then finally, changing our diets. Changing our diets can simply reduce the carbon emissions from food system by 25% or even more. But here we wanted to argue that we wanted to bring all this together. To new innovations, reducing food waste loss, change our diet pattern, all this together can reduce the carbon emissions by 60%, 70%. Then land use, land change. The land use is in our name, the FOLU, right? So land use and land change can sequestrate 1.6 billion tons of carbon into the soil, into the land. Huge. So you can see the whole food system plus land use can help China to sequestrate almost 1 billion tons of carbon into soil. I think China can do it. Pathways here. We need to change our behavior, change our investment priorities, and change our policy to achieve that.
Thank you, Shengen. Very inspiring. Diane, a question for you. You mentioned the role that businesses can play in supporting local actors. Could you comment more on that? Many of the businesses that you know are global businesses, but what can they do locally that would add value?
Well, first, I would say that there are such extensive value chains that large and small businesses are a part of. So there's a real accountability for the large global companies who have these very extensive value chains to engage their suppliers at every step in the process, all the way back to the farm, and understanding what is that market access, what's that factor, what's the income option frameworks, what's the technology access pieces, so that they can play a role in that. But in many of these areas of the world, SMEs are the backbone of the food system. And finding ways at a national and subnational level, at a local level, to engage so many entrepreneurial small and medium enterprises who are part of the system and don't always have certainly the resources to engage at the level of the types of conversations that we're quite privileged, frankly, to be able to take part in, are opportunities for us as we think about unlocking some of this opportunity. We think about ways to do that, and there's so many points of entry into those SME markets. We shouldn't ever overlook the importance of those leaders as well.
Thank you, Diane. And Claudia, there's a question for you about farmers. Some of the most vulnerable people in Colombia are in the farming community. What could the government be doing to support farmers to maintain their land and to live better, more prosperous lives within rural areas? A brief response from you.
Well, that's not a brief question. But anyway, farmers are the champions, really. I really agree with Ariana. I mean, we should put farmers up there. There's a lot of issues here in Colombia, for example, around land tenure, about markets, about, again, education, about accessibility. And so I think all the policies should look to the farmers and the way they can produce sort of healthy food in a more productive way, with more means, with more financing means, with more educational means, but obviously with more markets. And I think markets are crucial, because really what is happening right now is that they're losing what they produce, and the prices are not fair. So I think if they should do something around it, is sort of around education, financing, and fair prices.
Fantastic. Thank you, Claudia. And in our last 5 minutes, I want to ask you all, I started by saying this is a historic summit. It's the first time for 75 years that the UN has hosted a summit on the food system. I'd like to ask each of you, just for a sort of 1 minute pitch to the Secretary General, if he were listening, how will this summit be remembered? And I'm going to go in reverse order this time, starting with Claudia and finishing with Lawrence. Claudia.
Well, I think it should align a vision of change of the world around food systems. It should tackle imbalances and recognize, obviously, the importance of farmers and making people understand that their choices matter. Consumers have a huge power, and I think if there is a difference, it's from also the consumer side.
Fantastic. Thank you, Claudia. Schengen, how would you like history to look back at this summit?
Yeah, I think I agree with what I've already said. But one more thing I wanted to add is the data, evidence, and the research to support the pathways, and to evaluate the progress, and to make sure that everybody is accountable to what we are going to do.
Thank you, Schengen. Diane, great to hear from you on this.
I'm hopeful that we can all look back and say, this is the moment in time where stakeholders across these challenging systems came together to look at collective solutions based in science and knowledge to finally address these critical challenges of hunger, of climate impacts on agriculture, on farmer livelihoods, and on consumer engagement and awareness.
Thank you so much, Diane. Ariana, the Food Systems Summit, how will the farmers of the world judge success? What will history determine?
Well, the easiest way will be to talk about the farmers, but I won't. And I'm grateful to the other colleagues that have done it. And I'm really, that's for sure very important. But I would love to look back from 2040, 2050, and think that this summit was the moment in time where bold, daring partnerships with unexpected stakeholders stopped being a dream or something to be scared of and became the only way forward to be sustainable and to create opportunities. I think we would all gain a lot. Winning over suspects and ideology and focusing on solutions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ariana. And Lawrence, I'm going to give you the last word, or almost the last word. Go for it.
Thank you, Ed. So in many ways, the summit, I agree with what the other fantastic panelists have said, of course, but in many ways, the summit is the end of the beginning. It's not the beginning of the end, it's the end of the beginning. What's at the end of the beginning of? At a very sort of tangible material level, we kind of want to see different policies, different practices, new legislation, different resource allocations. But I think the really enduring legacy of this summit will be things that are deeper and more profound than that. There will be a change in mindset. A change in mindset that says you can't fix one part of the problem without looking at the whole food system. You can't look at malnutrition without looking at environment. And these things are indivisible and they're systemic. So the mindset shift that we are seeing actually throughout the community is really powerful. I want that to endure. And I also want the next level up between the mindset shifts and the tangible changes are the kinds of things that Ariana's been talking about. Shifts in power, new partnerships, new alliances. You know, so many of us have been working in these parallel universes, but the last 9 months have made these boundaries between public and private, small and big, science and social science, health and environment, it's made all these boundaries permeable. And we must make sure that those boundaries don't harden again as soon as the summit ends. I believe they won't. So that's what I hope the summit will, that's what I hope the summit's legacy will be.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. It's therefore left to me to, first of all, thank the audience for joining us, and this will go global. We're going to send it round the recording later. To thank the excellent team who've worked really, really hard to produce this event today at WRI and at FOLU. We're very, very grateful. And most of all, to thank this wonderful collection of panelists, Lawrence, Schengen, Diane, Ariana, Claudia. You've all poured your heart and soul into the work of the UN Food System Summit over this last year. And as you said, Lawrence, we're only just beginning, but we're all incredibly grateful for the work that you've done and the leadership that you show globally, as well as in the countries and in the sectors that you represent. So thank you so much for taking the time today. And we look forward to reconvening after the pre-summit to assess where we've got to, and as we approach the actual summit in September. So thank you again very much. Thank you everyone for joining, and look forward to stay safe and well, and we will meet again soon.